Hey guys, what's going on? Andrew coming at you, and in this one we're talking about hockey in Sweden versus the United States. I'm going to talk about growing up with hockey in Sweden versus the United States. I'm going to talk about the differences between the Swedish Hockey League and the NHL, the main differences I see when I watch hockey. So if you're a hockey fan, buckle up and let's join. And being from Pittsburgh, I love hockey. I grew up with hockey when I was a child, just watching the Penguins play. I feel really spoiled for all the amazing hockey I have seen. I've always enjoyed hockey because I think it's a very humbling sport. I just love how it's such a team sport. I love how momentum works in hockey, and there's just something about the gladiators to go out there and battle. I love the playoff hockey. Now, one of the key differences I've noticed in Sweden playing hockey in the United States is maybe accessible to ice. So if you grew up in Sweden, first of all, me being a teacher and being at some school events and things, so a lot of people have their own skates, a lot of children have their own skates, and you can go to an ice rink, but there's so many ponds and lakes in Sweden that if it's cold enough to freeze over, you got plenty of access to go out and skate and play some hockey. One thing they do in Linköping, where I'm from, what I like, is that we have a track and field, and what they do is they freeze over the track and field, share it among the community. So if you can afford a pair of skates, which is not so much here in Sweden, then yeah, you have plenty of access to go and skate. And another thing I notice when I skate there is I see that a lot of young children, maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, and their parents teach them how to ice skate at a young age. And if you want to play hockey and be really good, it's super important to skate at a young age. In the United States, growing up there, we had ice rinks, but I didn't have my own pair of skates until I decided to start playing hockey at 12 years old. And there were lakes and things I could skate at, but the access just wasn't there in the same way. There was no free place I could go and skate. So being in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, it was tough. Also, ice time. It cost a lot of money to go on the ice and skate with your hockey team or anything like that. In the United States, it's going to be totally dependent on where you live. If you grew up in Minnesota, for example, it's probably better. There's probably plenty of places to go skate. But if you grew up in the South, it's going to be a lot harder for you to find ice and find a hockey team. When you look at hockey's popularity in the United States, it's usually considered to be American football, then basketball, then hockey. But there's these pockets of areas in the United States where hockey is very popular. So, for example, when the Pittsburgh Penguins drafted Malcolm and Sidney Crosby, there was this resurgence of hockey in the Pittsburgh area, where kids started to get really into hockey, and hockey got more popular in Western Pennsylvania. The first major now, Sweden has a Swedish Hockey League, which I would probably consider the number 2 or number 3 league in the world. I would say that it goes in the NHL, of course, no questions asked. And then you have the Swedish Hockey League and the Russian Hockey League. There is a Finnish league as well, but usually the Swedish Hockey League and the Russian Hockey League are considered the best. I would say probably this year the Russian Hockey League is probably better than the Swedish Hockey League. But as far as number of players and skill. But one thing I would love to see is have the almost like a Champions League of hockey and have some of the Swedish Hockey League teams play the Russian teams. I don't think financially it would work out the way the seasons work. Now, the Swedish Hockey League has a season of 52 games, I do believe, whereas the NHL is 82 games. The biggest difference I noticed watching hockey in Sweden versus U.S. has to do first with the size of the ice. Now in the NHL, the ice isn't as wide, but if you go to a Swedish hockey rink, it's a lot more open in the middle of the ice and a lot wider, which gives a lot more space. Personally, I prefer the NHL style of ice because I like it a little bit more close quarters, but sometimes a lot of players will hold and things like that. So having a wider ice definitely opens things up. The major differences I notice as well is the speed of the game, and no offense to the Swedish Hockey League, but when you watch NHL hockey as opposed to the Swedish Hockey League, NHL is just so much faster. The speed of the game is so much quicker. However, I will say there's plenty of Swedish hockey players. Each team I watch that I see them play a game, there are dudes out there skating that have NHL type speed. There are players in the SHL that have NHL type skill, but it's not the speed of the game is the one major thing that I notice. Now, there's some things from Swedish Hockey League that's made it to the NHL. For example, Swedish Hockey League was doing automatic icing a lot quicker than they were doing in the NHL, and now it's something that the NHL has adopted. Now, culturally, a really interesting thing I noticed as far as the difference between Swedish hockey and American hockey is a lot of times Swedish hockey fans, in my opinion, are very similar to football fans. they'll have a section that I will see for like the away team and the home team when I go to a game, where as far as where the player like fans are sitting, and a lot of the Swedish hockey fans sing chants. Like there's a lot of chants and songs for the Swedish hockey team. Which is just kind of funny to me watching that. Whereas in the United States, that's not something I see at an NHL game as far as that kind of singing goes. We sing songs, but a lot of the hockey songs are like the same, like Cotton Eye Joe and, We Will Rock You and those kind of chants. But I do think it's really interesting and cool to see the singing that's involved with the fans. One thing that's cool about Swedish Hockey League is sometimes there'll be younger players playing, like 17 years old, and you can tell because they have like a mask on and they have to wear like the full mask to be able to play. But that's fun for me to see, because although the talent isn't the same in the Swedish Hockey League, it's really nice to see some of these young guys get a chance to play, because I feel like maybe some of them are going to get a chance to move on to the NHL. And major difference I see in Swedish hockey as opposed to the NHL has to do with this. There's no real fighting in the Swedish Hockey League. And personally, I believe that fighting belongs in hockey. Now, I'm not a fan of fighting in hockey as far as just for entertainment. Like in the NHL, they used to have one guy whose job was just to fight and another guy would fight. That I think is okay, not to have that as much. And I know the NHL is getting away from that. But they did this vote and poll in the NHL to see how many players wanted to keep fighting in hockey. And it was something like 99% of the players wanted to have fighting in hockey.
Fighting is part of what's known as the code.
Fighting's always sort of been a part of the culture of the game. And the game has always been allowed to police itself. So you do something bad, you pay a consequence. You hit a guy from behind, you're going to lose some teeth. And that's what the code says.
And the reason is they believe it actually makes the game safer. Now, in the Swedish league, without having fighting in the league, and every once in a while I'll see little small fights and like you can get suspended, but you just don't see it in the same way. Well, an argument is for fighting is that you want to obviously there's head injuries, and we know what we know now about head injuries, so we want to protect people. But you need some kind of form of punishment for taking a run at another player.
I think if you polled the players and asked them, they'd probably say keep it. So just in case when two guys get so pissed off at each other, maybe because one guy stuck a stick in his ribs and then he finally says, I've had enough, and wants to drop his gloves and break his nose. It makes guys think twice sometimes about taking liberties with other people if there's someone there that can come and settle things down.
If I'm a hockey player and I'm just going to go ahead and crush your star dude and I just get a penalty but nobody's going to fight me, like I'm going to take runs and dangerous hits on your guys because I'm not going to care so much about it. And there are a few times in the Swedish Hockey League I have seen this. Like I've seen some guys take some runs, they've taken some checks with their shoulder things out and taken some liberties with other hockey players knowing that, hey, you can't fight me, what are you going to do?
Fighting has been a part of the game. It does act as a thermostat in the game. This is a physical game, and fighting isn't the only issue. And in fact, fighting may help prevent other injuries.
Knowing that if you're going to take a run on Sidney Crosby or Forsberg, for example, that you're going to have to answer for that. Someone's going to come at you. And if you really think about it, most of the head injuries aren't happening from the fist fighting back and forth. They're happening from concussions the players are suffering from those really high head hits that are happening in hockey. And this is nothing against Swedish hockey, but I feel quite spoiled. Like being for me, I think the game's awesome. There are a lot of players that come that play in the Swedish Hockey League, that especially in Linköping and whatnot, that go to the United States and play. I do think that like the NHL is just more exciting to watch overall, which I don't think anybody would argue with. But I think crowd-wise, like I think I've been to some awesome crowds. I've never been to playoff hockey though in Sweden, which is something I really want to see. But I do believe that like just the overall vibe, like at least in Pittsburgh where I am, just like being there I've been at playoff hockey games in Pittsburgh, and like the hockey games I see in Sweden, they just don't compare to like the energy inside.
Like I was telling you, the vibe is there, you know.
It's just dear. I mean, maybe the Swedish like Linköping's hockey rink can hold 8,000 people. We're looking at 18, 20,000 people probably in Pittsburgh, and about most hockey arenas are like that, like 18 to 20,000. And that's just hard to beat, the energy and the rush that you feel watching that type of hockey. One last thing I want to say about the major differences is one thing I never realized being in the United States is there's like this World Hockey Cup that happens, and I've been to it here in Sweden. It was cool. It was the year that Sweden won. It's basically NHL players that don't make it to the NHL playoffs. There's this tournament at the same time in Europe called like the World Hockey Cup, or it's international hockey that they play against each other in this tournament, and there's a championship. I had never seen it or heard about it at all in the U.S. being a massive hockey fan because they don't show it in the United States because it's competing with like the NHL playoffs, so it never happens. But it's great because you get NHL quality guys. They come back to their home countries and they play in this tournament. And like I said, I saw it in Stockholm. I saw Czech Republic play Denmark, and I was in Stockholm when Sweden won the World Cup of Hockey, which was just amazing. It's really great hockey, and it's fun to see. Before I go, the most important thing I want to mention here is the most impressive thing to me is that in Sweden, like, hockey's big in the U.S., hockey's big in Sweden, and, you know, Sweden could play the U.S. in a game, and either team could win. But what's really impressive to me is if you look at the amount of NHL hockey players, professional hockey players that come from Sweden that are playing in the NHL, it's really impressive when you look at the size of Sweden. Sweden being a country of like 10 million people, just the quality of hockey here in the NHL players that come over is amazing. I think that hockey really, really fits with Swedish culture because Sweden is such a team mentality country. It's I don't want to say groupthink in a bad way, but it's about people agreeing and coming to an understanding together. And I think that kind of cultural thing or that cultural feeling that Sweden already has really meshes well with hockey and is one of the reasons that Sweden is so talented with hockey. So that's my feeling on it. It's good hockey here, and I enjoy it. If you like hockey and you agree with me or disagree with me, if you notice also any other differences that you want to mention, please let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hej då!